The emotion of fear often works overtime. Even when there is no immediate threat, our body will remain tight and on guard, our mind narrowed to focus on what might go wrong. When this happens, fear is no longer functioning to secure our survival. We are caught in the trance of fear, and our moment-to-moment experience becomes bound in reactivity. We spend our time and energy defending our life, rather than living it fully. And this week's opening quote comes from Tara Brach. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Igan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Fear really is an interesting emotion. Fear, of course, being the opposite of love. It is a very interesting emotion indeed. And a lot of people write to me and ask me how I deal with the fear. A lot of people ask me how I maintain high energy levels while knowing all the things that I know. How am I able to come onto the show and speak calmly about very disturbing issues? And look, it's not always calm, folks. I don't always speak calmly, as I'm sure anybody who listened to last week's show will clearly understand. Sometimes I can get quite angry. In fact, I'm angry most of the time in regard to the things that I talk about on the show. It's just that I don't express the anger in violent talk or violent behavior. I channel the anger into something more productive and more positive, something that I believe may make a difference, and that is to come onto the show and discuss all of these issues with people out there who may happen to be listening. That's just what I do with my anger. But the question here is fear. How do we deal with the fear of what is coming down, the fear of the situation that humanity finds themselves in? And how do you deal with fear in general? For example, someone was speaking to me recently about our entry into Gaza Strip. When Ken and I went in there in 2012, the entrance into Gaza was not your normal entrance. It was actually through a very small rebel tunnel. And the people that I've related this story to have often said to me they would find it very difficult to do that because they would be overcome with fear at entering into the tunnel. And many of them asked me how I was able to overcome the fear. And what I said to them was I did it by becoming the observer of my actions. Because when you become the observer, you don't really have a stake in the outcome of what you may be observing. And when you do it all the time and you are constantly in a state of observation of your actions, almost as if it is a third-party situation, then you find that there's no fear to overcome. Like when we were there at the tunnel entrance, I didn't have to suddenly put myself in third-person mode in order to overcome the fear. I was already in that mode because I'm in that mode most of the time, not all the time. I mean, I do slip up, everybody does, and I'm just as human as everybody else. But the thing is that when you are in that observation mode, then you find that you can do most things without the fear. And you've got to understand what fear is as well. Because what fear is, as I said before, is the opposite of love. But what does that really mean? What does it really mean? What is the significance of fear being the opposite of love? I mean, is it just a nice thing to say, or is there something profound about that? And really, folks, when you look at it, I think there is something incredibly profound about the fact that fear is the opposite of love, because it gives you a better understanding of what fear is. And as a byproduct, it also gives you a far better understanding of what love is. And that's an interesting thing too, folks, because you would be surprised that many people simply don't know what love really is. Many people find love to be a very, very confusing thing. And that's true, folks. It's a word that we use almost every day, and yet it's a word that very, very few people seem to truly understand. Most people have this soft, fuzzy view of what love is, and very often it's a very detrimental and harmful view of what love is because it prevents them from doing all the things that they could do were they to properly harness this emotion. But if you really want to get down to basics of what love is, well, love is the opposite of fear, which of course brings us back to the topic at hand, namely fear. And also, folks, it's good to remember that there are different types of fear. There are some which aren't really fear when you look at them. Like, for example, if you were playing on the railway tracks and you look up and happen to see an oncoming train, you would likely jump out of the way. But then one needs to look at that action and say, well, is that an action born from fear? Or is it simply an act of instinct, an act of self-preservation in the face of a clear and present danger? I mean, very often you'd find one would simply jump out of the way due to instinct in that sort of a situation, and they do so without even really thinking about it. And it isn't until one thinks about it, one looks up and sees the train and then thinks, oh my God, there's a train coming, and then they lapse into fear and they lapse into what was referred to in the opening quote as a trance-like state, whereby they become overcome by the fear and they get squashed by the train. But the thing is that when they look up and see the train, in that instant, are they overcome with fear, or do they simply allow instinct to play its course? Is that action born from fear, or is it, as I said, simply a reactive, instinctive response of self-preservation in the face of a clear and present danger? Because there is a difference, folks. One is strength born from instinct, whereas the other is paralysis born from mind. And they really are different things, and there really are different reactions to those two states, folks. As another example, about 20 years ago or 22 years ago, there was a situation with my ex-wife and I when we were in our car, and a bird spider had crawled into the car. And I don't know if anybody out there has seen the Australian bird spider, but these are probably the biggest spiders in the world. And this spider had crawled into the car and was on the inside of the passenger window of the car, and it literally took up the entire passenger window of a 1983 Holden Commodore. If anybody is an Australian, they know that car. They know these are pretty big windows, and it was hanging on to the chrome strip around the window and covered the entire window of the car. And my ex-wife was in the passenger seat. She thought she felt something crawl over her leg, but didn't pay any attention to it, and then she lifted her hand up to put the seatbelt on, and as she glanced to the left, she saw this giant spider on the window about 6 inches from her face. And she was 7 months pregnant at the time. And what she did, folks, was she let the seatbelt go from her hand and she squeezed between the passenger seat and the driver's seat and got into the back seat of the car in less than 2 seconds. And I would defy a pregnant woman to even be able to fit between those two seats, but she did it in less than 2 seconds. She was in the back seat of the car in the opposite corner to where the spider was. And there's no way she thought about doing that. It was simply an instinctive, reactive response that suddenly put her out of the clear and present danger that she was in. So the question is that a reaction born from fear? And I suppose it was to a degree, but was it something that she thought about, or was it simply an instinctive response? Because I would suggest that it was simply an instinctive response and something that she thought about after the event. Now, as I said earlier, folks, I'm able to remove fear from my life and do the things that I do because I don't have a stake in the outcome. And that may seem a little strange to people. They say, well, you could do something and find yourself dead. Wouldn't you have a stake in the outcome then? Well, not really, folks, because dying is inevitable. That's what I'm going to do in this life. That is the one thing that is guaranteed that I will do at some stage during this life is die. Of course, it will probably happen at the end, and so that's not a problem for me, really. It's just when that end comes. But I'm going to die one day, folks. That's a given, so I don't have any fear of death in what I do. Of course, this doesn't mean I'm going to do stupid things, but I don't have any stake in the outcome of what I do, and I don't live in fear of what may happen to me. I don't live in fear of death or fear of the outcome of any situation. I just let the outcome go where it would. Of course, I'll attempt to steer it to a certain degree, but at the same time, I like to keep things a little bit organic and simply let things develop the way they will. But folks, when you get back to the whole concept of love and fear being two different sides of the same spectrum, then you begin to get a wider perspective of what love and fear is and what it means to be in a state of absolute fear and what it means to be in a state of unconditional love. Because neither of these two things are really what people perceive them to be either. But really, folks, if you get down to it and you acknowledge that love and fear are simply two ends of a spectrum and that both are in fact connected to each other, then you begin to see what the relationship to each other is. Because what total fear is the complete lack of love. And what unconditional love is the total lack of fear. And in an attempt to help you understand what I'm saying here and to see this clearly, imagine that you exist in a reality where the only things that exist in that reality, the only things that you know, are paper and glass. Glass is one end of the spectrum and paper is the other. If you were to describe one end of the spectrum to somebody else from the perspective that all you know is paper and glass, then how would you describe glass to someone? What would you perceive glass to be? And what would you perceive paper to be? And really, because the only references you have are paper and glass, what you would perceive paper to be is not glass. And what you would perceive glass to be is not paper. You could even change the name of glass to the two words not paper. And you could change the name of paper to the two words not glass. And when you look at not glass as a thing in itself, this object is called not glass. Then you begin to see what I'm saying. You begin to see that what love is not fear. And what fear is not love. And once it really sinks in and you begin to see these two words as being the actual name of that state, then it's profound. It's truly profound when you see what it actually means to be in a state of unconditional love. It doesn't mean you're this warm, fuzzy, fake New Age person that pretends to smile and be nice to everybody when you really can't stand them. It means that you have no fear in your life. And when you have no fear, you find that you don't have problems with other people because all the problems that you have with other people are always born from fear. Always, folks, always are they born from fear. Sometimes we may not admit it to ourselves, but any dislikes we have towards others are in fact the product of fear. Now, this may seem a little cold to some people. Some people may be hearing this and saying, well, I love my dog and I don't see that as being in a state of not fear. It's this warm, fuzzy feeling I get and it makes me feel good and all the things that go when you're in a state of love. I mean, I can understand that. I can understand what they're saying. I'm just attempting to put things in a kind of a black and white perspective so that people can begin to see how important it is to remove fear from their lives and what it truly means to be in a state of unconditional love. Because if you're not in a state of fear, if you don't have any fear in your life, then you don't do bad things. You just don't. People only do bad things because they're in a state of fear. People only steal from others because they're in fear of scarcity. People only hurt others because they're in fear of some aspect of that personality who they perceive may be a threat to them in some way. People go and hurt other people. A rapist goes and rapes a woman because he's in fear of his own inadequacies. It's all fear-based. All of this stuff is fear-based. Unless you're a psychopath, of course, who probably just does bad things and rapes women because they enjoy it. But that's another thing, and I'm not addressing that. I'm simply attempting to address the everyday people out there who find it difficult to remove fear from their lives. Because fear generally is what makes most people do the things that they do. The things that they do to hurt other people and the damage they cause to other people all stems from fear. We may not admit it to ourselves, but ultimately it is. It's all fear-based. And if you remove fear from your life completely, then you are, by default, in a state of love. It's as simple as that, because you're only operating on one side of the spectrum. But the removal of fear can be highly beneficial, folks. It has really helped me. I mean, if I hadn't removed fear from my life, I certainly would not have had a combo treatment while I was in the Amazon recently. When I say a combo treatment, I actually had 3 combo treatments. And combo is an interesting thing, folks. If you have not heard of combo, it's actually frog venom, and it's an amazing thing that can do wonders for your health. And I've actually noticed a huge improvement in my life and in my overall health since doing a combo treatment. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about combo and explain to you what it is.